Can be Pablo's fingers all over the video.
It's really good. Makes the color really bright.
Okay.
Okay, we're on.
You're on? Did you share the link?
Yes.
Okay. So, today marks the Noumenia of Hekatonbaion. And what this means, Noumenia, as the name kind of sounds, new moon, Noumenia. Menia is the word for moon. The Noumenia marks the new moon. And this is actually a monthly thing. And we'll probably begin recognizing the Noumenia to some extent on a regular basis from now on, both the Deipnon and the Noumenia. So I want to talk a little bit about both these things because what I wanted to do is include into the daily life of practicing theurgists and aspiring theurgists the concept of a basic liturgical cycle to life. Right? What this means is that that days have meaning, that time and different times are acknowledged for having different qualities and different aspects to them. And this is something that's actually kind of important to begin to get in the habit of now, because there are certain ritual operations in the inner school that actually require a very high level of awareness of the time. And that time can be very important. So much so that the exact hour, even the 20-minute segment that you make a talisman in, will substantially influence the energies of that talisman. And it may end up having detrimental effects if made at the wrong time. Likewise, for an evocation or to speak with spirits, you need to be able to mark the time properly. You need to know which spirits rule that season, which spirits rule that month, which spirits rule that day, which spirits rule the hour of the day that you're operating in. Right? Which planetary influence are active on which days and at which hours of those days. And you need to be able to mark this and understand this. And for your internal alchemy, you need to understand that not all times are the same for meditation. Right? Any meditation is better than no meditation, but there's times, especially for internal alchemy, where meditation is particularly potent, such as the 4 magnetic seasons of the day, which is sunrise, noon, sunset, and true midnight. Right? True noon and true midnight. And so these are things that we have to slowly develop a sense of awareness to, because again, part of it is just about weaving reasoning through everything. So even our concept of time and what we do on certain days, there should be a reasoning to it, a pattern to it, that puts you in harmony with the universe instead of just in harmony with your ego. Harmony with your ego is, I go to work Monday through Friday. That's a you thing. That doesn't go outside your aura, right? That's a you thing. Oh, I go to sleep at around 10 o'clock at night because I need to be up for work. That's a you thing, right? It's based on yourself, on your ego. And, oh, I take the weekends off. That's a you thing. That's based on your ego. That's not based on any kind of actual truth of the universe or harmony inherent in life. And so, again, a lot of the spiritual path is trying to overcome the ego, trying to overcome these aspects of the self, right? And one of the ways that we can do this, interestingly enough, is sublimating our ego to cycles of time. And the ancient world put a lot of emphasis on cycles of time. And this is something that we don't use anymore, really. I mean, even our calendars and our 24-hour day and night cycle are probably the only two things in modern life that are cyclical now, that actually follow some kind of orbit, some kind of cycle of events outside our own ego. And even then, both of those, both our daily calendar and our yearly calendar, have fallen more out of line and fallen further away from the truth of these things. Right? So that, for example, because we don't take into account the moon's placement anymore for our calendar, the moon is something that just happens superimposed on top of the yearly calendar, the solar calendar. Because we have a purely solar calendar, which is technically in the old world, they called it a farmer's calendar, right? And the farmers were really the only ones that kind of needed to know the year based on the sun. right? A lot of the other old religious and even civic and political events happened based on the moon. And some of this is just because the moon was a great way to tell time. It's so constant, its motion is so constant. But some of it is because the moon has a profound influence on things. It has a profound influence on even something as simple as farming. It has an influence on pregnancy, on conception, it has an influence on delivery, it has an influence on mental health and stability. Right? Has an influence on the oceans, has an influence on hormone cycles in the body, has an influence on brain activity. The moon has an amazing influence over things of this world. So when we don't give that any appreciation, we're removing ourselves from one of the most imminent, most important cycles that we face on a regular basis. The other cycle is our daily cycle, our 24-hour cycle. And again, even this now has become purely mathematical. It's been removed from the organic aspect of it, right? Because the day used to begin at sunset in the old world, in most old world calendars. The day began at sunset, right? So for example, in the book of Genesis, when it says there was night and then there was day, the first day, there was night, then there was day the second day, there was night, then there was day the third day, right? It always begins with there was night, and then there was day. And in the old world, this is one of the main ways you reckoned what day it was based on exactly where the moon was. And so you had to wait for the sun to set. And there's an organicness to that, there's a life to that, to stepping outside and seeing the moon and knowing what day it is. Right? There's a connection there between you and this celestial event that's happening. And you're connecting to something that's greater than you. So even like our 24-hour cycle now has been kind of parsed. A lot of times the day was not necessarily always even, and the night and the day were not equal, but we have 12 hours here, 12 hours there. Even our current method of telling time actually is still derivative of that old way of using the moon, because the day begins when? What time does the modern day begin?
Midnight.
Midnight, right? The day still technically begins at night. And this is just a modern reflection of that old time when the day began at night, right? But now we have kind of a weird way of saying it because we intuitively experience day as the beginning of the day. We experience sunrise as the beginning of the day. And so that night is the same day, it's just that night, right? And part of that is why? Because of our calendar cycle, because of the sun and the importance of the sun in our calendar cycle. Whereas to more lunar cultures, the moon takes prevalence in determining the day. So understanding these cycles, ancient cultures had developed this to such a sophistication. If you look at the Chinese and the Tibetans today, they're the only ones who still use the sexagenary cycle, which is a 60-year calendrical cycle. But if you read some old Vedic text, you see a similar 60-year cycle through the writings of Vira. And if you look at all the old Sumerian, the old Egyptian, Babylonian, a lot of the old world actually acknowledged on top of the regular yearly cycle, a 60-year cycle, which is normally broken down into 5 cycles of 12 years each. Right? And this is because they also tracked the cycles of Jupiter. And they understood that Jupiter has a profound influence on us here. Now, we didn't understand that for a long time, but now we know that every time Jupiter gets close enough, when it gets to its closest orbit around the sun, it's the only planet with the strength to actually flip the polarity of the sun. And the sun's north and south pole will flip due to how close Jupiter comes to it over the course of a full 12-year orbit. So this is an important cycle because if the sun's polarity flips, everything's affected. Everything that receives the light from the sun and the energy from the sun. And they would track this in 5 sets of 12-year cycles and create a 60-year cycle. And then, if you look at the old Vedic calendars, it gets even larger from there, right? Where they would track the very lofty mathematical concepts, like how long it takes for our astronomical North Pole to move through all of its new North Stars before it returns back to the same North Star. So a lot of people don't even know this basic information anymore, but the North Star shifts, right? Polaris has not always been the North Star. Polaris will not always be the North Star. The North Pole shifts because of the way that the Earth has a gentle wobble on its axis, right? And it takes 24,000 years for the North Star to move through in this small little circle all these other North Stars. And before it returns back, so it'll be 24,000 years from now before Polaris becomes the North Star again. And even cycles like this used to be tracked by the old world and used to understand events, used to understand the kind of age that we're living in. So the point being that the old world had a very different concept of time than we do nowadays. Our time is largely agriculture-oriented and work-oriented, right? Which in a sense has just reduced us to things that eat and things that make money, right? And since that's basically what we've become in modern society, it makes sense that our calendar now follows that, right? And our way of organizing the day mirrors that. So, what I wanted to do is kind of reinstitute some of these old world concepts gently to create a sense of a liturgical cycle to your daily life, meaning that there's some days that are specialer than others for your spiritual communion. There's some days that are different than others for purification. There's some days that are important to observe and to honor because they bring in new influxes of energy for that lunar cycle. There's some days in the lunar cycle that are more malefic by nature. They're more difficult. There's some days that are more focused on purification. And what I wanted to do is kind of institute at least just some basic precepts back into people's lives who don't already follow a very strict liturgical calendar, right? Like if somebody's a practicing Muslim or even like a very devout practicing Catholic, somebody who practicing Hindu, somebody already has a nice liturgical cycle to their year with a whole bunch of things they should and shouldn't do on different days of the year, even each day of the month. They don't need something like this. But most of the students, most of the spiritual practitioners actually in the whole modern world now don't follow or adhere to any of those old cycles. And so it's important for us to not just completely throw that away just because of its religious connotations now. There's value in it, and magically speaking, there's immense value in understanding the energetic quality of each day, the energetic quality and differences of night and day within the same day, of different hours, of the different moons. And so these are some concepts I wanted to begin introducing back into people's lives. And the two basic ones are the Deipnon and the Noumenia. The Deipnon is the day before the Noumenia. And remembering that the Athenian calendar, because these are all Athenian, this is the way it was celebrated in Athens. Remember that the old Athenian calendar, like many lunar calendars, began at sunset, right? So the night of the Deipnon, the night that the Deipnon begins is the night before the Noumenia begins. Now, this is a different concept than a lot of people are used to nowadays because the urge is going to be to just look at lunar phases and plan everything, put everything down on your solar calendar as to what day it's going to be. And it's not quite that simple. Right? It's not quite that simple because you need to actually, as much as possible, you need to have a certainty for what you do. And so I'll talk about this concept for a moment. Intent is validated by certainty. Okay? You can have your intent to perform the Deipnon or the Noumenia on a certain day. But that intent, so to say, if it's not accompanied by the seal of certainty, of personal certainty, then that intent remains weak. It doesn't invalidate what you're doing. It doesn't invalidate your celebration of it, but it does a few things. One, it puts you at risk of celebrating it wrongly, because you may be celebrating it on the wrong day due to a lack of certainty. And two, intent with certainty is much more powerful. So the intent can go, right? The intent can function better. It puts it more in line with truth. So what I mean by this is an important concept of certainty. What I mean by this is that, for example, if you're going to celebrate the Deipnon, you need to go out at night before you decide to call it the Deipnon and look in the direction where the moon is and make sure you don't see it. Because if you see it, it doesn't matter if someone told you it was the Deipnon. It doesn't matter if some calendar online said that that night's the Deipnon. It doesn't even matter if I said that night is the Deipnon. If you walked outside and you saw any light on the moon, it is not the Deipnon. And to celebrate it, to celebrate the Deipnon at that point completely invalidates it. Because you have certainty the other direction. You now have certainty it is not the Deipnon. So to celebrate that, when you're certain that it's not the time for it, right, just robs it of all of its spiritual energy and potential. Okay. On the other hand, if you go out and you see for yourself, there's no light coming from the moon at all, then you can with certainty now begin to observe the Deipnon. Observe is a better word than celebrate. So now what's the Deipnon? The Deipnon is an old celebration, was done throughout the Greek world. And there's something somewhat similar to it that happens in just about every old culture. It's the understanding that the dark moon, the empty moon, we call that the new moon now in modern astronomical terms. It's not the new moon. Right? In any lunar calendar, the new moon is when you see the first sliver. Right? It's when you actually see the light. So we'll call it the dark moon. And the dark moon is regarded in most cultures as being a sign of malefic spirits, of the underworld, of the undead, of ghosts, of ghouls, of demons, of all kinds of things. And the deities that rule that night are usually kind of darker deities associated with higher levels of tantra, magic, things like that. And so to observe the Deipnon is usually a fairly lengthy process. The simplest way of doing it is to just clean the house. And what this means is that this has a practical function and a spiritual one. The practical function of cleaning the temple area, the worship area, at least, minimum, clean the worship area on the Deipnon. The practical function of it is that you get a calendrical date to make you clean your worship area every month. Because otherwise, months can go by and you don't clean it, you don't take care of it. Right? What do you think when you walk into someone's house and it's dirty? You think they don't take care of their house. Right? So why should you treat your altar any different? Treat it like you care about it. Try to keep it clean. So it gives you a monthly reason to clean up your worship area, clean up your practice area, if not the entire house itself, which is ideal. You really should do the entire house. But also, it serves the function of now everything's nice and clean for the next lunar day, which is the Noumenia, the new moon celebration. When you see the sliver in the sky, now the Noumenia begins. That's when you now redress everything, put some nice new fresh flowers on the altar, dress up all the idols again, clean everything, say your prayers, make your offerings, put fresh incense up, right? It's the beginning of the month, so like make everything nice, new, and fresh. Whereas the Deipnon is cleaning out the old. And so when you celebrate the Deipnon, the concept of the Deipnon, religiously speaking, is that Hekate, who's the Kali of the Greeks, she's a kind of wrathful feminine goddess. She's a wrathful goddess who is connected to occultism, to magic, to the sacred rites, to the Eleusinian rites. She's one of the torch-bearing goddesses of the Eleusinians. And she confers magic powers. But she's also kind of similar to Kali and Shiva in that she's associated with kind of eternal grounds, burial plots, ghosts, demons. She wears a necklace with heads on it and skulls, and she has hellhounds around her. She's kind of a ferocious being. And the concept is that she rules this night, and that the dead that are trapped in the underworld, the ghosts that are here roaming around, right, have a right to what is left over. Okay, so just keep in mind that phrase, that we would say Hekate has a right to it, but Hekate is far beyond those things. She's kind of overseeing it. It's her night. But we say that the spirits of the underworld have a right to what is left over. And what that means traditionally is literally everything that's left over. right? Like the old Greeks would actually sweep the floor and take any bits of food that had fallen on the floor during the course of the month and put that in a special thing to be offered to the spirits that night. You should take the incense ash and put it in a container. You should take any oil from your oil lamps, clean out the oil lamps, put the old oil into a thing to be offered. Take the old flowers that you put on at the beginning of the previous month that now should be old and withered. Take all those, put them in a nice basket. Take everything old, everything that is now left over as you're cleaning the house. Now don't throw a bunch of dirt and hair and stuff like that in there. No, these are like, they need to have some value to them. Things that, especially things that had value before, right? And now they don't now, and you're just going to throw them out. Right? And so you take things like this. I should add, things generally that are biodegradable, and you kind of put them all in an offering basket. And the idea is that the spirit world has a right to this, right? Like you were just going to discard it, so it doesn't have a place in the world of the living anymore. It's no longer going to serve us the way that we want to be served by it. So now we're going to let them benefit from the residual energy and influence of it. All right? Especially if we made offerings with it, it benefits them. So we put all of those in a special place after we clean everything. Then you go through the house that night with a clay tray. Generally, traditionally, that should be made each time anew. Right? You just take some clay, bake it in the oven, or get a little fire going and cook it around the fire to harden it off. You put some charcoal on there, put some incense on it, and you fumigate the entire house after you cleaned. You clean everything, you go through, you fumigate the entire house. Then you take the clay tray with the incense burning on it. You take the basket with what was left over, from the ashes and everything, the incense ash and food offerings that you did during the month and flower offerings you did during the month. You take those things, and at night, you go to a place that needs to be symbolic of the underworld in some way. So the Greeks would celebrate it by going to a crossroads. You had to go to either a crossroads, which are sacred to Hecate, or you had to go to like an abandoned place, like an old abandoned shed or house or something like that. Some place where the living don't really interact there much, right? Or a place that was traditionally associated with that kind of dark goddess. And you leave the offerings there. You can pour them out of the basket and take the basket back with you, but the clay plate with the incense on it should be left. Once you leave the offerings at night, you turn around and you walk away and you don't look back at them. And the idea is that you're leaving this for the underworld. You're leaving this for the ghost. An interesting magical effect that this has is any negative spirits that are residing in the home will generally, intent is a very powerful thing. So now that there's an intent that this is for them, what is going to happen is they're actually going to follow you out of your house. And it's very difficult to get them out of your house if you don't know the banishing methods otherwise. But the Deipnon actually kind of tricks them. And that's why the incense should still be burning and stuff. It's like, come on, I'm going to go make offerings to you. And you go out of the house, and the negative spirits will actually follow you. The ghosts and things that are trapped in the house will actually follow you. Right? And that's one of the reasons why traditionally you go to a crossroads, because crossroads are confusing to spirits. They don't have a good sense of direction. Right? And so you go to the crossroads and you leave everything there. And then you turn away, you don't look at it, because now they're partaking in the offerings. And you walk away, and by the time they're done, you're gone. Right? And they're at a crossroads and they can't get back. So that's one of the folk reasons for why you would take them to the crossroads. But it actually does work. I mean, there's definitely a kind of negative energy that'll follow you out of the house, and it won't come back with you. Right? And it's important because everything has value to the magician. Everything has value. Even negative spirits, they're still living beings. Even ghosts that are trapped, they're still living beings. Right? Our compassion needs to extend to them also. And so the Deipnon is like a compassionate activity for the world of ghosts and ghouls. Right? But it also helps you clean your house. Has a very nice effect on the energy of the place. We had a nice Deipnon here the other night, and it had a really nice potent effect on just the atmosphere and the energy in here. And it was really nice in here once you guys left. I don't mean you guys made it not nice, but when I was just here by myself walking around at night, it was really nice. The energy was great. So it's a nice way of purifying everything. If you want to take it a step further, the last 3 days of the lunar month, meaning the Deipnon and the 2 days before the Deipnon, were traditionally times for the Athenians of like repentance. They were times for like austerity, repentance, penance, purification rites, prayers of forgiveness, things like that. You know, fasting. The idea being that these are malefic days. These are difficult days, and they're ruled by difficult spirits and difficult beings. And so you're kind of like taking a few days to purify yourself, get right with yourself, reflect on how you spent your month, apologize to people you may have offended during the month, you know, try to kind of reprimand yourself a little bit for some of your activities. Just review your month in those 3 days, right? Apologize to people, mend bridges, chant Kyrie eleison, you know, do your water purifications, maybe fast a little bit. Do some things that's kind of like solemn, you know, treating them as kind of like these solemn days. And then what begins next is the Noumenia. So after the Deipnon, if you timed everything right, the Noumenia will begin with the observance of the sliver of the moon. And again, certainty is important here. Right? Certainty is important. If it's cloudy where you're at and you can't see it, call somebody whose house it isn't cloudy at. Right? Or wait until it's going to clear up later in the night. Go out a few times. Or call somebody somewhere else in the country, you know, and ask them, like, hey, like, did you go out tonight and see the moon? Could you walk out right now and let me know if you see it? Someone whose witness you trust. Right? And so, and then, but if you can see it yourself, that's the best. But definitely, if you can, try to see it. Obviously, a lot of people are just going to be like, oh, Veo says, you know, today is the Noumenia. And we'll mark it on the calendar because people need to prepare for things. So, okay, this day is going to be the Noumenia. But every now and then, I might make a post saying, hey guys, I went out tonight, I didn't see the moon. And so I can't say that the Noumenia is today. So we'll celebrate the Noumenia tomorrow. You know, and that may happen occasionally. But if you can, try to do it yourself. Try to go out and see it. Because there's an important connection there. Right? There's an important connection. One thing I really like about the way that the Muslims celebrate Ramadan is traditionally, to celebrate Ramadan, your personal celebration is supposed to begin when you go out and you see the sliver of the moon marking the beginning of the month of Ramadan. And it doesn't matter what anybody else said. Right? You need to try to see it yourself. And if you can't see it yourself, you have to rely on a valid witness, somebody whose testimony you completely trust. And you know that they know where to look in the sky for the moon. You know that they know what to look for in the moon. And you know that they're a truthful person. Right? And this is because certainty is very important in that religion. And so, likewise, certainty has a power to it. And just get into the practice, it's good to connect to the moon. It's good to have like a relationship to nature. That's one of the things that made Plutarch and Syrianus accept Proclus as a disciple. Was when Proclus came to see them and he spoke with them briefly and they stayed up into the night. And when Proclus left, he got out and he happened to see where the moon was and he knew that it was an auspicious day for the moon, so he took off his shoes right there and he said a prayer and offering to the moon and made a libation to the moon. And he didn't know they were watching, he thought he was out of sight. And they both saw it. And that impressed them more than anything that he had said intellectually while he was in there with them. There's another story, some Tibetan master, I can't remember who it is. But he would famously ask people when they came to him asking for instructions, he would only allow new students to come at night. And when they came at night, the first thing he would do is he would say, tell me about the sky tonight. And if you couldn't tell him about the sky tonight, it was going to be a long time before he let you back in that room. Because the kind of person that doesn't look up and think how beautiful the stars are is the kind of person that isn't going to really dedicate themselves to the spiritual path. Right? The idea that if you don't have that wonderment for what you can see, how are you going to have that kind of wonderment for what you can't see? If you can't acknowledge the beauty of what you can see, how are you going to recognize the beauty of what you can't see? Right? Awareness is an important thing. being aware of your environment, being aware of nature, aware of the moon, aware of the sun. And so, the Noumenia celebration is generally when you should get new flowers for the altars, get everything should be nice and clean now, light your incense, make your offerings. If you're going to make offerings at any point in the month, at least do it on the Noumenia. Because it just sets the tone for the whole month. The moon's going to carry that energy. And whatever you do on the Noumenia, the moon carries that energy throughout the month. So if you want to have a good month, have a good Noumenia. And it can help you incur those blessings. Now, another observation of the month that you can do, if you want to, is the second lunar day. On the second lunar day, the day after the Noumenia, is the traditional Athenian day for worshiping the Hekatonbaion, which means the personal spirit. Right? Your personal, like your guardian angel is the modern way of saying it. That it's the day for kind of making offerings to your guardian angel, supplicating to your guardian angel, offering prayers of thanks, and thanking the angel for its guidance and for its wisdom and its inspiration throughout your life, keeping you alive. It's let you live this long. Probably quite a difficult thing to do for some of you. So it's, so you kind of, you're offering thanks to it. Right? And that's the traditional kind of second day thing. And then the seventh day of the seventh lunar day of the month is sacred to Apollo. And that's the time that the Athenians would worship Apollo. So, and this seventh lunar day of the month, the seventh lunar day of Hekatonbaion, is the day to worship Apollo. That's the day that the hecatones were offered, 100 oxen, would be offered each year to Apollo to ask for wealth and prosperity, health, good graces, good fortune, all of those things. So, don't go out killing 100 oxen for Apollo, though. Just maybe offer like $100 to a charity organization or something. But the number 100 is sacred to Apollo. So if you can do something on that day, that's a nice thing to do. But anyways, these are just some things I could give you guys something to do every day of the month. But
what's the moon supposed to look like on the seventh day?
The seventh day is going to be a quarter moon. It's going to be a true quarter moon, which is really a half moon. Like when you're looking at it, it should be like right down the center. So this is what I wanted to talk about for the lecture. Was just introducing people to this basic concept of the celebrations, of the Noumenia celebration, the Deipnon celebration, giving you guys some basic instructions and guidance on it, and the importance of kind of beginning to integrate yourself more into a cycle of living, like observing some of these cycles and trying to understand their influence on you, on nature, on the way you think, on what you do, and taking advantage of them to try to optimally spiritualize your month, your energies, and your life.